Okay, so good evening everyone and welcome to the Shine Dome. The Australian Academy of Science acknowledges and pays respect to the Ngunnawal people, the traditional owners of the lands on which the Academy office is located. The Academy also acknowledges and pays respects to the traditional owners and elders, past and present, of all the lands on which the Academy conducts its activities and where its fellows live and work. They hold the memories, traditions, cultures and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples of Australia. So welcome to this event to celebrate National Reconciliation Week 2025. I'm Arthur Georges, Professor Arthur Georges. I was elected to the Academy in 2024, so I'm a newbie. I'm an ecologist that has extensively studied reptiles, and in my studies I've had the great pleasure to work with Aboriginal communities in Australia and local communities in Papua New Guinea. I spent time in Mabuigilaig when I was 20, and that's like 52 years ago, if you can believe it. I find it hard to believe. When I was 20, working on the crocodile research program. And again, I worked in Arnhem Land much later with the Barwon Aboriginal Corporation on wildlife utilisation. And basically, that activity wasn't to turn a buck, it was to provide another avenue for young people in the region to remain connected to their lands and to interact with traditional owners in culturally meaningful activity. So it was a really important project from that perspective, and it was funded by the Australian Research Council and ran for about 7 years. I also had the great pleasure to work with the local communities in Kakuri in Papua New Guinea on community-led conservation and environmental education, and that program's been running for about 15 years, and it's ongoing now under national leadership via the Piku Biodiversity Network. And finally, I was engaged recently by the Commonwealth to undertake species assessments for freshwater turtles nationwide. And a component of this was a requirement to consult with Indigenous communities. And it was really interesting in the sense that what I took away from that exercise is that local communities are not looking for consultation, they're not looking for engagement, they're looking for marriage. They want to be actively involved at all stages in conservation planning and action, from the very start in identifying the challenges that we face in conservation, in formulating the strategies and plans that we adopt to address those challenges, in consultations with industries that want to develop resources on their lands, and they want active participation and to have employment opportunities in any on-ground initiatives that arise from the implementation of those plans. So there's been progress on this in Australia, but we've got a long way to go. And I think from those connections that I have, fairly minimal though they are, I'm really delighted to be here tonight and to welcome you to the Shine Dome for this event. And welcome also to those watching online from all parts of Australia. I wish to offer the apologies for both the President of the Academy and the Chief Executive, who are both travelling overseas as we speak, so they deeply regret not being able to participate this evening and asked me to convey that to you. Each year, the National Reconciliation Week occurs from 27th of May to the 3rd of June. These dates commemorate two significant milestones in the reconciliation journey. There's the successful 1967 referendum, where Australia became a nation, in my view, where all Australians were part of that nation, and the High Court Mabo decision. The National Reconciliation Week theme for 2025 is Bridging the Now to Next. It reflects the ongoing connection between past, present and future, and calls on all Australians to step forward together and look ahead and continue the push forward as past lessons guide us. Australia's history of reconciliation has not been a linear one. We've made great strides, but we've also experienced disappointing setbacks. But in 2025, we continue that work to build a more united and respectful nation. The Academy's vision for reconciliation is that contributions to scientific knowledge from Australia's First Nation peoples are respected and celebrated, and that we together draw on diverse knowledge sources, including traditional knowledge, to build a stronger, more innovative and sustainable nation and world. The Academy's actions to advance reconciliation are laid out in our second Innovate Reconciliation Action Plan, which we launched in September last year. If you've not yet had a chance to read this, I commend it to you. The RAP shows the changes we wish to make, changes that are designed to be systemic, strategic and sustainable. They aim to ensure Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are empowered to engage in science and to enjoy its benefits. Obviously, in the Academy of Science, we are very keen to promote the benefits of a scientific way of thinking, whether it be traditional or from the Western perspective. One way we are continuing our reconciliation journey is the awarding of our annual Aboriginal and Torres Strait Scientist Award. This award recognises research in the physical and biological sciences by outstanding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander PhD students and early and mid-career scientists. It aims to support their research and the growth of their research networks and international knowledge exchange through visits to relevant international centres of research. Since its inception, we've had 16 awardees. This group of stellar Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander scientists show us what we can achieve when we support diversity in our scientific endeavours. They are truly a talented and inspiring bunch. Tonight, we're delighted to be joined by the 2025 recipients of this award. Associate Professor Shannon Kilmartin-Lynch and Dr Mitchell Gibbs. We look forward to hearing from them both very soon. We're also joined tonight by Dr Katrina Wruck. In addition to her scientific work at QUT, her outreach activities in many schools and communities in Queensland and her contribution as a member of the Academy's RAP working group, Katrina is this year's Young Australian of the Year, and I think we should put our hands together to celebrate that great achievement. She gives generously so much of her time, knowledge and expertise to help us on our reconciliation journey. Katrina, on behalf of the Academy, we thank you sincerely for your ongoing advice and support. And we're so thrilled that your contributions have been recognised as Young Australian of the Year. I'd also like to mention Professor Bradley Mogridge. He's here with us tonight. Brad has been an advisor, consultant and friend of the Academy for many years. As Katrina does, he often challenges our thinking and we're always better for it. And thank you for all your support and advice over many years, Brad. It's really appreciated. Yeah. On behalf of the Academy, I'd also like to sincerely thank our speakers and MC for being here tonight. We understand you're called upon often and by so many, so we're deeply grateful for giving us your time, knowledge and insights. I'm delighted now to hand over to our MC this evening, Tiahni Adamson. Tiahni is a proud Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander woman descended from the Kurrareg Nations. Tiahni is a marine scientist and passionate advocate for Indigenous-led climate action. She is currently National Engagement Manager for Bush Heritage Australia, as well as wearing many other hats at the intersection of Indigenous justice, climate change and environmental conservation. In 2023, Tiahni was named one of the Science and Technology Australia's superstars of STEM, and last year she was named South Australia's Young Australian of the Year. So thank you for being with us this evening, Tiahni, and over to you.
Kapugabil, good evening everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here and thanks for coming out in this gorgeous cold Canberra weather. And notice that you're all rugged up, so thanks for making it out in this beautiful time of Reconciliation Week. I'd like to acknowledge that we're here on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and it's such a privilege to be in this time and space that we are now, to be able to bridge now to next, like the reconciliation theme, come together and do things differently and better than we have over the last 240 years. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were the first scientists, the first of everything actually, the first bakers with gluten-free bread. For those of you who have a bit of an allergy to that, all of our bread was gluten-free, the first doctors, the first inventors. So I'm pretty proud to be an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander woman, and I'm really glad to see people coming out to celebrate our incredible, deep, rich and diverse culture. We've lived on this country for about 2,500 generations, which is a really, really long time. If you add all of those greats in front of your grandmother or grandfather, that's a long, long time of yarning. We lived on this country with diprotodon, which is pretty cool, old megafauna, and cared for country with deep scientific knowledge of this land in harmony. And our science and knowledge was well understood way before PhDs were invented or before you needed a piece of paper to say that you were deadly. Our law and knowledge systems have always held country at their heart, woven with wisdom and guided by really long arcs of time. Bridging now to next speaks to who we are, future-facing people with long-term governance, not just four-year election cycles, really long, at least 100-year plans, thinking about our future generations and the world that they're going to live and grow up in. We're deeply rooted in the footsteps and the dreaming of our ancestors while we're looking forward this far as well, which is something that I'm really proud of. Reconciliation is not just a passing moment, although it seems for a lot of people like it's a 5 or 7 day event. It's a shared responsibility for all of us, and the onus can't just be on First Nations people. This theme calls us forward as sovereign people to lead with strength, truth, and the enduring fire of re-self-determination. That sexy word of self-determination, we were already self-determined people before colonisation, so we're re-self-determining ourselves as we get our rights back today. So thanks for being a part of that journey. We've got a really exciting event with 3 amazing speakers, some of our wonderful, deadly Black scientists in the room, which I'm really excited to announce. And then we've got a panel at the end, which will be guided by some questions that I've put together, as well as questions from the audience. So you can all chuck me questions across, and our beautiful folks online can put questions in as well. So I'd now like to introduce Sis Katrina, who's a proud Panay First Nations Mabuigilaig woman and this year's Young Australian of the Year. Her pioneering work in green chemistry as a lecturer and researcher at the Queensland University of Technology has marked significant strides in environmental science and community empowerment. Beyond her scientific achievements, of which are many, Katrina is the founder of Nuki-Kula Green Labs, which is a profit-for-purpose enterprise aimed at revolutionising the consumer goods sector through sustainable practices. Pretty bloody cool. Her work exemplifies the integration of First Nations knowledge into modern scientific innovation, reflecting her commitment to caring for country and community. Thanks, Sis.
Hello, hello. It's great to be here tonight with you all, and thanks so much for the introduction. It's always it's funny when you hear how you get introduced. It's it's really, really great. So we're here today celebrating 65,000 years of peer-reviewed science, engineering, math, medicine. It's peer-reviewed because it wasn't just made yesterday. Someone figured it out a really long time ago, and then as Tiahni said, it was passed through by word of mouth, by spoken language, over 2,500 generations. That's pretty crazy to think about. So I'm here to talk a little bit about my career and a little bit about what National Reconciliation Week means to me. I won't be focusing too much on my science. but I'm sure you will find my presentation very insightful. So let's start with my ancestral roots. So my dad's parents, my dad's dad is Afghani and German. My dad's mum is Irish and English. My mum's mum is Panay from Mabuigilaig Island. And we've got my grandfather on my mum's side, who's the only one of my grandparents still alive. He's from Italy, from Sicily, Catania and Palermo. So very mixed ancestry, as with a lot of people these days. You know, Australians, there's a lot of us from many, many different parts of the world. So let's talk a bit about the stolen generations. We couldn't talk about reconciliation without talking about this. So when my family left Torres Straits in search for work, they were subject to the government policies of child removal. They left in the early 1900s, and when they were travelling through Queensland, when they were travelling south, that's when they hit trouble. So we had 3 generations held as wards of the state. Their lives were shaped by surveillance, control and separation. They were unable to practice culture, unable to speak language. 2 children in my grandparents' generation were stolen. So my grandmother's brother and sister. Her brother was taken as a baby from his mother, and her sister went missing as a 13-year-old girl walking home from school. We have looked for them through the government services of Link Up Queensland, but they still have not been found. My mum was actually the first one in my family to be born free. So it's not like this happened a really long time ago. It was my mum's generation. I've achieved more than I could have ever dreamed, especially as a child, growing up and having the difficulties I did have in high school, which you will hear about shortly. I'm the first in my family to finish university. I'm the first in my family to become a doctor, PhD, in chemistry, in chemical engineering, in fact, and the first to be employed as a lecturer. Also, I have had successes as well. I won the Outstanding Doctoral Thesis Award, and you'll hear a bit more about that in a bit. I also won a Sage Publication Prize for the best paper. I won a Queensland Women in STEM Award in 2022, and I founded my startup. When I won the Young Australian of the Year, I also became the first Torres Strait Islander person in history to win the National Australia Day Award, ever. So my family back home, back on Mabuigilaig, and in the Torres Straits are very, very proud of me, and it's been a really great accomplishment to be able to share with community. But how did I get here? So you can see there's some slides here with photos of me from high school and even younger. But yeah, I think it's really, really important to show this is my journey. So from now to never, when I was in age 7, grade 2, I was learning to read. Teachers told my parents I would never learn to read because I was learning slower. So I changed schools and I learned to adapt and I learned to read, 1 word at a time. When I was 15, in grade 10, I wanted to study the hard math. I believe it's called math methods now. They told me I wasn't allowed to. I wasn't allowed to study hard math. I couldn't do it for no reason other than we just don't think you can. So they put me in the lower math, and when I topped the class, they had no choice but to put me into the hard math that I wanted to do. So I earned my place in that course. At my own awards ceremony, 8 years in, I was in the middle of my PhD. A colleague who was senior to me asked, "Are you sure you're cut out for academia? Are you sure you can do it? It's really hard." The question wasn't about my ability, it was about his assumptions about me. But I stayed the course and I earned my place. I might not have been cut out for the traditional role, but I cut my own path. 3 years ago, when I first shared my idea about my business, my company, where I turned mining waste into the main ingredient in laundry detergent, using a new low temperature method you could do in a household oven. My colleague told me, your company will never get off the ground, it will fail. But I believed in the vision and I kept pushing. And one day, I had a breakthrough. When you build with purpose, you rise. I also ran past him in the hallway the other day. We crossed paths, and he said, "Congratulations," can look me in the face. The Swedish Revenge is just doing well. So when there wasn't a path, I made one. I navigated my neurodivergence. I've only recently, just before I won the Young Australian of the Year, I was diagnosed and started medication. But I discovered new ways to learn and built my own pathways to success. I never fit society's expectations of who should succeed in science. By all accounts, I was never meant to make it, and I certainly wasn't meant to be a lecturer and researcher like I am today. So, when I graduated my Bachelor of Science honours degree, I graduated with second-class honours, second-class Division A, which actually does not mean you go into a PhD. But I managed to gain entry and I found a scholarship. Lucky I did, because I went on to publish a thesis that was in the top 5%. But according to institutions, I wasn't worthy of that. So it goes to show you the way the institutions are set up and the way that they assess people isn't 100% about their ability. We can talk more about that, but that's okay. We won't have enough time today. So the golden trifecta. For me, the golden trifecta was being black, being female, and being neurodivergent. People doubted my cognitive abilities, and this was a reflection of their biases. But ultimately, they assumed I was incapable of performing to the same level as everyone else. Yet at every stage, I proved my worth. I had to prove my worth. I had to work harder than everyone else to be there longer and to keep forging a way forward. So, on to reconciliation. When thinking about reconciliation, I think it's important to think from a historical point how science has been weaponised against Indigenous people. So social Darwinism is essentially an misapplied theory of Darwin's theory of evolution, and essentially they used the theory of natural selection to justify racial hierarchy. And they claimed that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were a dying race and they needed to save us, essentially. We didn't need to be saved. They used this to justify their racism, the segregation and the social inequity. And then we have eugenics, which essentially is selective breeding to deliberately breed people out. They tried to breed us out, essentially, by taking us, by stealing us from our families and placing us in these institutions, as you saw in my family and in a lot of other families as well. These ideas have been discredited. We know that that is not science, it is pseudoscience, but their effects remain. We still have generational trauma, we still have health inequity and education inequity. So that is why recognition and truth-telling are so vital to reconciliation. And this exclusion has a big cost for us, to well-being, to the economy, and to the future of knowledge. Excluding people from education, it fuels cycles of unemployment, disconnection, and disadvantage. No one has more knowledge about this place, Australia, than we do, than Indigenous people. So by removing us from science actually weakens innovation, sustainability, and the ability to care for country. The spillover effects harm entire households and communities. So when elders have had bad experiences with school and with science, that carries on to the next generation. Their kids and their grandkids aren't likely to go to university or think education is important because they grew up in a mission and they were forced to learn all these things against their will, taken from their families. So we should not be excluding people. And a lot of science's success is from traditional knowledge. A lot of modern science is built on stolen knowledge, stolen traditional knowledge. And when I mean stolen, I mean it was taken without prior, free and informed consent and was commercialised, patented in some cases, without traditional owners having any involvement. An example is the commercialisation of tea tree oil and eucalyptus oil. Everyone knows that. You can buy it pretty much anywhere, but that was stolen knowledge. They have antibacterial, antimicrobial, antifungal effects, and yeah, you can buy them a lot of different places. At the same time though, we're being discredited and thought of as inferior. So there's two things that don't essentially line up, but that is essentially the world view. So traditional knowledge is based on science, engineering and maths, but it was understood empirically, not to the same level of scientific insight we have today with all of our modern equipment. But looking at the philosophical differences between Eurocentric science and First Nations science, the common ground is where we can make strides, the common ground in the middle. I use Eurocentric science here because saying Western science puts England at the centre of the world, and England is not the centre of the world. So, common ground. Feel free to look up the reference here. There is a really, really great article that summarises Indigenous versus Western knowledge. But in summary, Indigenous knowledge is holistic, community-based, practical, and is linked to a local context, whereas Western science is very compartmentalised, structured and linear. So, green chemistry, what do I actually do? So, I make new materials to accelerate the degradation of forever chemicals. So they're called forever chemicals because they last a really long time. And I do that using material science, industrial chemistry, and chemical engineering. So essentially, it's molecular architecture. I will take a rock, I will break it down into its building blocks, and I will reconstruct it in a certain way that's different, but using the same constituents to make new materials. So if you haven't heard of PFAS, they are all around us. They are in microwave popcorn bags, water-resistant clothing, paint, waterproof mascara, stain-resistant furniture, non-stick cookware, personal care products, etc. So there's 10,000 different types, which makes it really, really hard to detect in the first place. They take 1,000 years to even begin to degrade. All of the PFAS that has ever been created still exists, except for a small amount under research purposes that has been destroyed. It moves through the environment as aerosols attached to water droplets, and it bioaccumulates in plants and animals. Because they move into aerosols, they move into the cloud formation. Once they're in the cloud formation, clouds go anywhere, like the middle of Antarctica, like the middle of Australia, where people don't even go. And we've still got animals and plants infected with PFAS, these forever chemicals. And we're actually consuming it when we eat some fish and those kinds of things. So it causes severe health effects, but the extent isn't known. It hasn't been around long enough. We've only had about 40 to 50 years with these chemicals. Essentially, there is no safe level of PFAS, which is why I'm in a job. So the company that created it, DuPont, they were the initial creators of this. But why is it so hard to destroy? Well, looking at the math, we're not going into too much math, don't worry. Look at something called a bond dissociation energy, which is essentially the energy you need to break these bonds apart. So apply a bit of energy, the bond will break. If you don't have enough energy, the bond won't break. So the carbon fluoride bond is the strongest carbon heteroatom bond in organic chemistry. So you can see it's got quite a high energy. You need to break that bond. And that's why they're forever chemicals. It's because that bond is really, really hard to break. And so, how do I break those bonds? Well, I essentially use an electrochemical device. that's got a positive and a negative terminal and flows electricity through the middle. And I make materials that sit in the middle of that, and they basically promote this reaction to happen. They chop up the PFAS molecules into little bits, and you end up getting carbon dioxide coming off and fluoride. But what keeps my passion burning? It is inspiring the next generation to overcome these glass ceilings, these systematic barriers that stand in their way, and the people that tell them that they can't. Because I did it, and I know that they can. And letting someone else's opinion of what you're capable of is not worth the paper it's written on, you know? The only one who can make it happen is you. So go get it. Thank you.
Thank you, sis. What an amazing example of determination, perseverance, staunch black women, bloody rule. They're one of my favourite types of people, probably my favourite type of person, if I'm allowed to say that. Well done for the fantastic work that you've done, not just for science, but for your community and for all girls to be able to see fantastic examples of what they can be. You're incredible, so we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. We now have an epic video that we're going to play. Our next two speakers are Mitch and Shannon, who are down the front, and they're joint recipients of the Academy's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Scientist Award. But before we hear from them, we're going to play this little video about their work and their achievements.
Sydney's Botany Bay is one of the most industrialised parts of Australia. 2 runways sit on massive fingers of reclaimed land, while more than 1,600 container ships dock at the nearby cargo terminal every year. But for Uncle Robert Cooley, this is home.
Oh, this place, means everything to my family. I'm a son of a fisherman, a grandson of a fisherman. We relied on this ocean to supply food on the table.
The local Aboriginal people refer to Botany Bay as Gamay. Uncle Rob is one of the Gamay Rangers.
Our role as rangers is to work with the different decision makers, government, local environmental groups to keep this ocean as clean as possible.
And that's how he started working with the University of Sydney's Dr Mitchell Gibbs.
Oh yeah, pull the top over.
A proud Dunghutti man through kinship, Dr Gibbs is a geoscientist drawing on traditional practices to restore local marine ecosystems, particularly shellfish reefs. Less than 1% of shellfish reefs remain nationally, but combining traditional cultivation and management practices with Western science may hold the key to restoring shellfish populations.
For Indigenous Knowledges, what you want to do is work with the community that lives there. You need to be able to go to those communities to then say, what do you know? How can we learn from you?
Uncle Rob says when researchers fail to ask those questions, research projects can be viewed as intrusive or exploitative.
So, Mitch, that trust has built up, and I think we're at the stage now with, Sydney Uni and others that we can be free to open a dialogue and ask each other questions, because I think we know that their work is around improving the oceans, which ultimately benefit us.
Dr Gibbs now wants to extend that dialogue by collaborating with Indigenous communities around the world.
The project that we're doing, especially with the Gamay Rangers, is bringing people from the United States, Hawaii, Washington, hopefully people from New Zealand as well, to come to Australia and talk about the restoration projects that they've done.
And I'm not sure why, but it seems that every time, like every season, we get large blue swimmer crab numbers, we get large cicada numbers as well.
The project will be funded by the Australian Academy of Science after Dr Gibbs was named one of the recipients of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Scientist Award. The award's other winner for 2025 is Associate Professor Shannon Kilmartin-Lynch from Melbourne's Monash University.
I'm a Yolngu Balak and Ngadarak Balak man and part of the Taungurung people in Victoria's northeast Kulin Nations.
Associate Professor Kilmartin-Lynch uses his research to help care for country by reducing the ecological footprint of construction projects.
A lot of what I do is making sustainable materials more applicable within sort of cement and concrete construction, so anything that's got to do with a cement-based material.
And given that the concrete sector makes up almost 8% of global carbon emissions, there's a critical need for material substitutes that don't compromise strength or cost. He was part of the team that turned roasted coffee grounds into a charcoal-like substance called biochar, which can replace a portion of cement in concrete mixtures.
You know, Melbourne being coffee capital of the world has sort of got picked up by everybody, and that ended up in over 1,800 media outlets in 82 different countries. You know, there's been times I've been at conferences and people come up, oh, you do the coffee.
Associate Professor Kilmartin-Lynch's new project explores the traditional use of plant resins by Indigenous communities.
Indigenous people surely haven't gone and put it into concrete before. It wasn't something that was used within Australia. It was definitely used in other materials and, you know, in other processes, but we're going to take the knowledge behind those processes and try and incorporate that into concrete.
He says the work will honour cultural methodologies while addressing present-day engineering and sustainability challenges.
I think the most exciting thing, you know, about this is, you know, working with my community and at the end of the day, being able to help my community.
You can clap for the video. I could see you both trying to melt into your chair, but you're both so deadly, and it's so nice to see those bits from the field. And when you finish your presentation, if you can do the slow rolling camera face, we'd really appreciate it. If you didn't have crippling imposter syndrome, I'm sure you do now from listening to these three deadly young scientists doing incredible work. I'm going to get Shannon up to have a yarn now. Shannon is a proud Yuwang and Ngurrung Balik man of the Taungurung Nation, based at Monash University. His research is grounded in respect for country, community and culture, focusing on the integration of Indigenous knowledge systems within foundational engineering, particularly concrete, soil and sub-base materials. His work challenges traditional Western scientific knowledge frameworks by embedding Indigenous ways of knowing, being and doing into infrastructure design, construction and sustainability practices. Thanks, Shannon.
Hey everyone, how's it going? So yeah, I was going to talk about my research, but I sort of decided to take a different approach tonight. Firstly, my name is Shannon Kilmartin-Lynch, and I am that moved. I'm a Gibbs and Taungurung man, a part of the Victoria's Kulin Nation's first people of the rivers and mountains in Victorian high country. So I wanted to sort of start tonight talking about how I ended up in this space. So I became an engineer because engineering is theoretically, it's about change. And it's not just about machines or formulas. The theory all behind engineering is about adapting. It's about facing complex challenges and finding new ways to respond. And that's what drew me in. The idea that nothing is ever fixed, that we're always learning, testing, adjusting and reinventing. Ooh. So when I sort of sat down and had a good think about it, I realised something. I realised that Indigenous people have always been scientists, always been engineers. Indigenous Australia didn't survive for 65,000 years by staying still. We adapted to shifting climates, to fire and floods, to colonisation, to every disruption that was thrown our way. We engineered systems of knowledge that are fluid, iterative and resilient. From seasonal fire regimes to aquifer management, adaptation is in our DNA. So that's why I became an engineer, not to impose new systems, but to recognise the brilliance behind the ones that we currently have. And to walk in a profession that at its best is about transformation that's rooted in relationship. So we've discussed how engineering is about adaptation. It's about problem solving under pressure. I should probably stop doing that. And that's not just a technical skill, it's a cultural one. First Nations peoples are the oldest living continuous cultures on Earth, not because we stayed the same, but because we changed. And we adapted to tools, systems, knowledges. We burned land to regenerate it. We built fish traps aligned with tidal systems, and we regulated aquifers. So Indigenous science isn't a fixed archive, it's a living system. It's resilient, it's empirical, and it is foundational to science. But it sort of operates within a different logic. It's a logic that doesn't separate engineering from ecology or science from spirit or innovation from ethics. And that's a lesson that modern engineering and modern science desperately need. And look, don't get me wrong, there are many powerful stories that I could share tonight about Indigenous science, about Indigenous innovation, materials, methods that can rival the best of modern science. But I've made a choice not to share them. And that choice is deliberate, because we cannot continue to celebrate Indigenous knowledges without first building the systems that protect it. Too often the push to platform Indigenous science skips crucial steps, where stories are told without permission and practices are documented without protocol, where Indigenous knowledge is repackaged as innovation, while communities are left out of the benefit, the authorship, and the future. Celebrating Indigenous science before we secure its protection is sort of like opening a door and walking through it before we build the walls. And this isn't a historical problem, it's a current one. It happens when research is rushed, where speed is prioritised over relationships, where consent is treated as a box to tick rather than a process that's been grounded in respect, responsibility and reciprocity. Our institutions typically reward fast outputs, papers, grants, media hits, anything that gains attention. But Indigenous knowledge doesn't necessarily live on that timeline. It lives in a relationship, in place, in story. And when we separate it from those systems, we strip it of its meaning and misuse its power. So this is more than an ethical blind spot. It's a failure of science itself. Because knowledge gathered without context, it starts to become shallow and tokenistic. Data stored without community access becomes extractive, and research designed without cultural accountability becomes harmful, even when good intentions are intended. And too often people misunderstand what Indigenous knowledge is, and that misunderstanding creates a space. That space is opened up for appropriation, for bypass consent, for empty acknowledgements that leave elders and communities out of control. And we can't let that space persist as a community. So when I'm invited to speak in places like this of such scientific prestige, I feel a responsibility not to showcase stories, not to showcase research, but to call for structures. Not to offer knowledge, but ask for protections, and not to celebrate before we've secured safety. We must stop asking Indigenous knowledge to serve science and start asking science to serve Indigenous knowledge. And that begins by shifting our mindset, slowing down and letting trust guide the process. Refusing to separate knowledge from responsibility, because these knowledges don't just hold cultural value, they hold cultural authority. And that cultural authority should always come first. So I impose a question. What would it mean to do research differently? It would mean learning from Indigenous epistemologies and values, not just the content itself. That means understanding that knowledge is given, not taken, that every act of learning is an act of responsibility. If we learn something from country, we owe something back. And this is what reciprocity can look like. It's not a romantic idea, it's a research method. It shapes everything, how we enter a project, how we design it, how we report on it, and how we analyse it. Relationality, on the other hand, means everything is connected, and that those connections carry obligations. If we treat water as not only a resource but kin, and we do have a very special guest, Brad Mogridge here, who does a lot of work in this space in Indigenous water sovereignty. Data is not neutral, it carries story. And we can see that, and we can't see country as a passive backdrop, we have to acknowledge it as a living archive. If we want to do good research, we need to embed those principles into our frameworks, not as cultural garnish, but as a methodological foundation. And don't get me wrong, this isn't a rejection of scientific method itself. It's an expansion of it, and one that is urgently needed in the challenges that we face today. We don't just need more knowledge, we need new ways of thinking. In Western science, we often aim for universal truths, But Indigenous science values something different, precision that has been grounded in place. We read the landscape as a living archive, and we notice shifts in winds, changes in animal behaviour, flowering patterns, shellfish growth, and these aren't just observations, they're indicators. This is science that responds to place, and in an era of climate change, we need that more than ever. Place-based design leads to better infrastructure, buildings that breathe with country, materials that come from country and return to country. And Indigenous knowledge offers not just environmental insight, it offers design principles for sustainability, equity, and resilience. So if we want to move from extractive ethical research, we need to redefine how we define success. We need to value non-traditional research outputs. We need to recognise collective authorship with community that benefits and shows value to community. And we need to uphold Indigenous data sovereignty. We must ensure that our outputs are not just academic, that they are tangible, that they serve a purpose with community where the community can see value. In Western research, knowledge is often validated through writing, but in Indigenous systems, stories carry science. Stories are data, ceremony is celebration, and memory is method. These forms aren't less rigorous, they're just held very differently to how we normally see them. And the biggest barrier to all of this isn't the knowledge itself, the knowledge is there. It's the structures that are in place that are currently stopping it. So most research institutions and funding bodies are not yet designed to support Indigenous-led research. They reward speed over trust, they count papers and not relationships, and they fund projects, not partnerships. Our universities and research institutions have to be the one that lead the change, that have to evolve with the changing times. Only then can we create systems that truly support collaboration, place-based and decolonised science. However, despite public commitments to elevate Indigenous knowledge and prioritise Indigenous science, the government as well as research institutions have yet to build the foundations that are required to support it. There are funding bodies that reference Indigenous science in their strategic plans, but without frameworks grounded in Indigenous governance, data sovereignty or cultural protocol, these commitments ring a hollow bell. What's left is a space that is filled with ethical blind spots, a space where knowledge can be taken, repackaged and profited from, all without community consent, control or benefit. So as a collective, we can't say we value Indigenous knowledge and then fail to protect it, because that's not reconciliation, that's exploitation by another name. And yes, we need to redefine scientific excellence to include story, care, and community impact. So this past week I had the privilege to spend some time on country before I came out here and before the start of National Reconciliation Week. And I want to reflect from some time that I spent on country. When I was sitting around with my elders and with my community, I saw engineering and I saw science in place, balanced within country. But unfortunately, we also see the cost of not listening, the lost knowledge, the dismissed insights, and the extractive models that we currently call research. If we are serious about reconciliation, about science, and about sustainability, we must be serious about walking differently, better within these systems. Indigenous knowledge doesn't need to be included in science, it needs to be partnered with it, it needs to be protected, and it needs to be celebrated. Because I see a future of science as not just being technical, it has to be ethical and it has to be relational. It must be built on listening, reciprocity, and place. This past week, I attended an event where Yorta Yorta Man and academic Tiriki Onus spoke. And at the end of his talk, he said something that stayed with me. If there's anything you take away from today, share our stories, amplify our voices by sharing our stories. So if you take one thing from me today, let it be that. Walk with us, share our stories, let them live, breathe, and let them be the change that they are meant to be. Thank you.
Wow, that was super deadly. I think we need to get this man to the National Press Club tomorrow. Can anyone organise that? That would be great. Surely someone's got to connect here in Canberra. Thank you, Shannon. That was an incredible speech. I want to get you on a platform to be able to yarn to everyone really important messaging around Science that responds to place, that has calling for structures around protection and safety of our knowledge systems, really incredible stuff. And calling out tokenism in science, really important, so thank you. We now have another deadly Dr. Science human man to speak with us, which we're very lucky to have him here. He's just got back from Scotland, so he's a little bit weary, but he's okay. I'm now introducing Mitchell, who's a Taungurung man through the kinship of Dunguri Nation and a dedicated marine scientist whose work bridges Indigenous knowledge and Western scientific practices. He's based at the University of Sydney, and his research focuses on the restoration of marine ecosystems, particularly oyster reefs, by incorporating traditional Indigenous knowledges and perspectives. Thanks, Mitch.
Mitchell Gibbs. Hello. So I was going to do a sort of presentation and get everyone to look up here, but I think the best way is to, everyone close their eyes and to visualise themselves. I want you to visualise the environments that we have now, how ecosystems are dying. We've got all of these biodiversity dying out. We've got loss of habitats. But I want you to think about a future. Think about an ecosystem, environments that are healthier. There's more fish floating around. You've got a lot more seagrass, oyster reefs. You've got all of the people swimming, fishing, people teaching culture on what these environments are. These environments are incredibly impactful to our communities and to all of us, whether we're Indigenous or non-Indigenous. As Indigenous people, we have a holistic view of what those environments look like. When we start talking about restoration, we don't say that oyster reefs are the answer. We don't say that only seagrass is the answer. We say that it's a holistic view. We need to look at biodiversity. We need to look at how all of these interact together. When we start thinking about restoration, we need to think about the ecosystem as a whole and not one part. We need to look at how, yes, we need to clean those environments, but oysters aren't the only answer for that. We have mussels, we have clams, we have pippies. We have so many different bivalves that do this same job. But when we have all these different bivalves doing this same job, we're able to bring in other things into that environment, whether it's the fish, whether it's the octopuses, whether it's the crabs. All of these other things play such an important and vital role in these ecosystems. We need to understand that when we're thinking about the environment, we need to think about everything that comes into it. That's also the mangroves, that's also the salt marshes. We need to think about what we have done to the environments now and what we can do in the future. We have changed the environment in a lot of ways. We can't go back to the way things were 250 years ago, but what we can do is be better. What we can do is look at a future where we're doing the best we can, looking at the best way of being able to understand the environment and the best way to be able to move forward in that sense. We have so many ways that we can look at the environment but have chosen not to because it hasn't aligned with the Western academic sense. I did a Fulbright fellowship in America in 2023 and I worked with communities through Washington, through Alaska and through Hawaii. They've started a lot of this Indigenous-led restoration projects. They've been able to show when you start looking at a holistic sense of the environment, you're able to understand all of the interconnected webs of that environment. We're able to understand that when you start bringing Indigenous practices in, you can start to look at the environment and understand that you don't have one thing interacting with one thing. You have one thing interacting with a network of systems. As an example, they were talking about clam gardens, and clam gardens are a really, really important system when looking at mitigating against climate change, impacting the biodiversity within the area, affecting rocky reefs as well as onshore reefs. Now, that was a system built over thousands of years ago, and people are only started to really understand how much it will impact our environments now. There's the same with the fish ponds all through Hawaii. How those systems interact with the water coming off the mountains and then the water coming in from the ocean. That brackish water, when they mix, and how that interacts with all of the fish, all of the biodiversity, the seagrasses, all the bivalves, everything in that system all interacts together. We look at the same when we think about the mussels in Ahiwa Harbour in New Zealand. So in thinking about all of these aspects about the environment, why haven't we done it here? We've got so much knowledge about our environments. We live in a place where we have thousands of generations, like Tiahni has said, thousands of generations of knowledge being shared, but in a sense, no one's listening. We've got a lot of people who want to help. All of our community elders want to be able to share their knowledge. They want to be able to say, we know this place. This isn't a band-aid knowledge. We don't have knowledge from Sydney, where I'm working with the Gamay Rangers, that are going to help people up in the Torres Strait, because all of our knowledges are different. We have different cultures, different language, different ecosystems. As an example, we've got a different ecosystem from the opening of an estuary to the end of an estuary. You've got pH changes from 8.1 going down to 7.8. You can't expect the ecosystems to be the same, nor can you expect the knowledge to be the same from Sydney all the way up into the Torres Strait. So to be able to understand, we need to know those place-based knowledges. We need to know to go to the communities in those areas and talk to them and say, what do you know? What can we do to learn from you to better our environments? For me, I think that we need to do this to be able to benefit our environments. We need to do this so that in the generations to come, we can talk about how we used to fish different mullet, or how we used to go out and collect clams, or how we used to go out and look at oysters. Generations to come, they mightn't have that if we keep going down the same route that we're going down now. And so along those routes, as part of the project that I'm running with the Australian Academy of Science, I'm bringing people from Alaska and America, from Hawaii and Washington, and then from New Zealand to talk about the impacts of Indigenous-led restoration projects, bringing those to the communities here so that we can understand the challenges that they've had, but also the successes, how they've been able to do these restoration projects. They've been doing projects, especially in Hawaii, for over 15 years, and they've been very, very successful. One of the main differences between restoration in Australia on a Western sense and Indigenous restoration is that you're looking at something as a product. You're looking at something as a finishing, you get to a target. Indigenous projects aren't like that. It's not a project, it's a garden. When you start working on something, you continue to do it. The whole point is to not be at a point where you can stop. The whole purpose is to keep going. Make that environment better. The more you can do, the better it is. My uncles have always told me that we've got a relationship with the environment. That environment means where the healthier it is, the healthier we are. Do we have a limit on how healthy we can be? I don't think so. We've got, with the way that we look at Indigenous restoration, we can start to understand that when we work with Indigenous communities, and I mean particularly collaborate, work with, bring those people on board. Don't just go in, take knowledge and then leave, but form relationships, form friendships. It's the same with going to a friend's house. You don't go in there, eat all their food, ask for money and then leave. You go in, you sit down, you have a cup of tea, you talk for a while, maybe something comes up, but if it does, look, need a bit of hand, mate, can you help me out? And they often do. It's the same with community. So many community members want to be able to do that. So many community members want to be able to be given that opportunity to sit at that table and say, yes, this is the way that restoration should be done. Those voices haven't been heard at those tables because a lot of those voices aren't heard generally. In saying that, I won't keep you too long. I know people are probably getting hungry, but I will say two things that my aunties and uncles have told me. Was the first thing is everything is 90% fun, 10% serious. We can always learn in the fun, but sometimes you do have to be a little bit serious. And the other thing is that you've always got to add value. There's no point in going somewhere and just talking for the sake of it. It's just fluff. Whenever you go somewhere, you need to add value, otherwise just don't talk. And so in that, I'll say thank you, Marumbu.
Thanks, Mitch. I'm going to get our other wonderful panellists up. Loved your yarn as well. Speaking about the diversity of our ecosystems and knowledge systems is such an important thing. There's not a one-size-fits-all. That would make our work way too easy. There'd be no point of doing all this science if it was so easy to do. And about long-term planning and projects, I loved the comment about do we have an upper limit of our health and the health of our environment as well. We stand on this stage here today because of the path paved before us by a lot of incredible elders, community members and people who have gotten us to the point of being able to have a seat at the table right now. So we're going to open up for some questions, which you can... No, just kidding. There will be a QR code coming up. Ta-da! Where you can send us a question if you like. And I'm going to start with a couple from our wonderful humans. I'm going to come sit with you. Alrighty, I'm going to start with a feeling question about going back to your childhood or to a younger time in your life. You're all not very old, so it's not that far back, except for Mitch. I'm kidding. Can you share a moment from your childhood or early life that sparked your connection to science and to caring for country?
All right, I'm just going to let you go first. So I would say, I grew up on 100 acres in Willawarren, and my dad used to take us up the back, and my brother and I, so I have a twin brother as well, so my brother and I, we would go up the back there, and then Dad would just say to us, he wanted us to understand where we grew up and how to know. This is when we were like 5 or 6, how to get home. And so he would just say, like, wait for me. And then he'd say, oh, give me 10 minutes and then follow. And so we'd have to find our way back after he'd taken us up in the back. And from there, like, I was able to really, you start listening to things, you start seeing things, and you start understanding the environment in a different way. And I think that the first time that we did that, my brother and I even started to see things in a different way, and I think that continued with just seeing the environment in a different sense, understanding that we have a role to play and we are part of the equation. And I think that that is extended up until where I am now, to try to make people understand that whenever we, with Western science, we start talking about how we can take things out of the environment and understand the way things work, but then when we start thinking about what we are and who we are, then that plays a role, and we need to make sure that who we are isn't being a detriment to the environment. Convoluted, long answer, but yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. Katrina?
So my love for chemistry actually blossomed when I was watching a movie. It's a sci-fi movie. Any Nicolas Cage fans in the audience? But it's called The Rock. It's Nicolas Cage is a chemical weapons specialist. I think it's the FBI. And he was obviously saving the world from total annihilation. There was sarin gas and he was called in to like dismantle it. And it was a really big deal. With Sean Connery there, not as James Bond, but someone else. It was great. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. What a great job. I could be cool and mysterious and have bragging rights like that. But then I realized that I could save the world using green chemistry and cleaning water, cleaning soil, cleaning country. So I decided to go with that instead. And I think that was a good choice. But I think my first real exposure with caring for country was when I was visiting my late uncle's farm, and we were removing lantana from across 150 acres, which is a massive task. So lantana is a weed, and it's really bad for the cows, and he had cows. So it was, seeing the impact of country, of that invasive plant on country was pretty confronting. And then in with that, dealing with water health of the dams, something I'd never been exposed to before. But yeah, that's how it all started, really.
Scared of Nicolas Cage. Yeah, look, I mean, I always sort of had a knack for, and had a very big interest in change and, you know, looking at things, looking at different systems. But I don't really think I had a calling for engineering. I just sort of, you know, I loved engineering, I loved change, and I loved to be about that change. But I guess, you know, I was a bit older, like 16, 17, before I really knew what I wanted to do. I couldn't really find a purpose in life, if that sort of makes sense, you know. I was just stuck hanging around the wrong group of people and didn't really have a purpose, didn't think about engineering, didn't think about science, for sure didn't think about ever doing a PhD. But, you know, I just sort of saw myself, you know, coming out of engineering, even working in industry, working on projects for the rest of my life. But I mean, circumstances changed in my life that sort of led me towards doing a PhD. And a big turning point for me was having a daughter. And, you know, seeing the impacts, especially for me in my field, that, you know, construction waste has on country and how devastating the extractive industry is. There was a real sort of like kick to the face, and then, you know, having a daughter at the same time, thinking, okay, what's this going to look like in 20, 30 years when you're old enough to, you know, have kids of your own, and like, how are you going to be able to decide what you want to do if there isn't something here to actually take care of? So I think that's sort of what gave me a kick into the direction of, you know, how can I care for country through an alternative method of research and, you know, make a larger contribution.
Thirdly, thank you. I've got a question from Cameron, who's in the room. If you want to reveal yourself, no pressure. For those of you who've had to go through human research ethics committees, have you found they generally help protect cultural safety, or can they obstruct knowledge systems?
It depends. So there's quite a few different systems for NHMRC approval, which is where human ethics comes in. It depends on the institution. So unfortunately, there's a lot of ways in which institutions can still take Indigenous knowledge, even if it's under human ethics. So that comes in with looking at copyright. Copyright's a tricky little thing where, let's say I tell you my life story and you're recording it. The life story itself is my knowledge, but the recording is yours to do with whatever you want. And so that becomes a very, as I said, tricky little thing where if you're working with Indigenous communities, you need to set up protocols and contracts and ways in which to protect the community from that. A way that I've been able to do it is work with IATSIS. Now, IATSIS is a place that is able to store knowledge, not own knowledge. And so when you have NHMRC approval through an institution like that, then you're not actually giving somewhere like a university the grounds to be able to hold it and say it's ours, but you're able to put it into a place that understands that that knowledge is owned by a community. And as I said before, making sure that all of the ways in which you look at NHMRC approval and the contracts involved in working with communities, that they're able to then say that, one, that they're happy with the way that you're doing it, but two, that what you're doing is set up in a way that is culturally appropriate and has the ICIP kind of outlook. Terry Jenke's done a lot of work on it, so and so if you wanted to have a look at that, then go for it.
Yeah, I think ethics in science is, it's a blind spot. There's good points and there's bad points. I'm a very big advocate for identifying country as a living entity and as a living system, so therefore it does fall under more rigorous ethics approvals. A lot of times in the physical sciences, in physical engineering, you don't necessarily need human research ethics approval if you're not necessarily working with humans or anything living. And that's where I think a lot of that, blind spots and loopholes come into play. And a lot of the times in my experiences, a lot of ethics approval committees, especially the ones that sit in institutions, not so much outside institutions, they might not necessarily have anyone that has lived experience, anyone that is Indigenous approving Indigenous research. So there's blind spots there where, and then the accountability on the other side of things, to get through now you typically have to respond to how you meet the 4 pillars from the IATSIS code. But where's the follow-up? Where's the accountability? Where are we holding people to accountability within ethics research? And, that's where I feel Indigenous knowledge has the opportunity to be pillaged, because you can bypass a lot of ethics to get access to Indigenous knowledge. You can, author papers, you can put patents down without community consent, without, community control. So I think ethics, it's a very touchy spot, especially when it comes to the Indigenous knowledge space, and that's why I think we need better frameworks for Indigenous knowledge to be supported in place so they aren't pillaged.
I like what you said about accountability, and I think that is really, really important. What I've seen so far is the ICIP protocol, which stands for Indigenous Cultural Intellectual Property, and that belongs to a group of people. Normally with intellectual property, it belongs to a person or an entity, but because it's a group, it's a community of knowledge. Every institution seems to have a different way of doing it. I mean, when you're applying for grants, you have to go through the specific one for the specific thing, like the NHMRC, something, abbreviations. Sorry, I don't deal with health research, I deal with chemicals, which is great. So I don't have to deal with human ethics, but there is actually an amazing framework that's just been released over Christmas, and it's the Australian Council for Deans of Science. They published a framework on embedding Indigenous perspectives in the curriculum, and there's some really, really great frameworks in there that actually show you at the point where you need to start engaging with community, at the point where it could become exploitive if you didn't engage. And it's very clearly outlined in that framework. So please go have a look for that when you get a sec. The Australian Council Deans of Science framework.
Deadly, thank you. Dr. Mitch, this one's for you. What's the best way to improve the Murray-Darling River system, including the Murrumbidgee? That's from Melina, watching from Wagga Wagga.
Hey, Melina. It's such a big system that I don't think there's any one method of being able to say what the right way is, but I think I think the first steps in being able to improve, especially that river system, is being able to understand that there's been a lot of damming and stuff that's gone in there, and which has taken a lot of water away from it. And one, being able to bring, I know that we're not going to be able to break those dams now, but somehow being able to bring those water levels back up. Because there's so many evidences of massive fish die out along the Murrumbidgee and the Murray-Darling. Outside that, I think it's just working with the Indigenous communities to understand the river system better. The more you can understand it, the more you'll be able to put into place systems that will be able to work within each other. So that's the first thing I can say. I wouldn't be able to give you a specific thing to do. The only thing I could say is work with the communities.
Thank you. Yeah, great to be able to increase flow, work with invasive plants and animals that are in the space as well. Really important for our water systems. With this deadly work that you all do, what kind of ancestor do you hope to be through the work that you're doing today? Don't cry. You will be old one day.
Yeah. I feel like I'm getting old now. I mean, I don't necessarily like being like a centre of attention or like, you know, being thought of an ancestor or, you know, leaving behind a good legacy. I just hope I do my family proud. And that's, you know, do my family proud, my mob proud, and care for country where we can. And, you know, that's all I can hope for in life.
I really just hope that I made the way easier for someone else who comes next. You know, because there wasn't anyone for me to look up to. I didn't have that, you can be what you can see. But because I didn't really prescribe to the people that we were meant to, you know, celebrities as being a young person, I never really was interested in that anyway. So, yeah, if I can just make the way easier for just one other person, I'm sure it'll be more than that. But, yeah, I'll be happy with that.
I hope that I'd be similar to my late father, who was someone that was that people looked at when they wanted to laugh, but when they were also knew that something would get done. He wasn't there tooting his horn about anything. He was giving a lot of respect to other people around him, but he was very well respected himself. I don't care if I'm someone that is remembered. I just hope that that the things that I hopefully can do in this life will benefit people in the next.
Beautiful, thank you. We've got a question from Jody, who's also in the room. Thanks, Jody. Shannon, you spoke really powerfully about the need to change how universities, research institutions and funding bodies approach funding research. For all of you, are there any examples of funding models or practices that have empowered Indigenous knowledge and leadership and supported knowledge system sharing on country in ways that traditional funding models do not?
I don't think I've seen one that will cover all of that. I haven't had any experience with one that would go into that depth. And I mean, that is something that we do need, and that is something we desperately need. We need a model that, like that, can cover all that. And don't get me wrong, like the Australian Academy of Science, they do great things. There's First Nations Prize and awards. But, you know, there's a lot more that needs to come from that as well. And, you know, very grateful to be in this space, very appreciative to receive this award. And yes, it does put an advance towards Indigenous knowledges, but there needs to be a larger collective to really, you know, lead a path of change.
In the same vein, I think with the ARC in particular, at the moment there is no ability to be able to pay community for their time.
Oh, there is.
Oh, there is now?
Yeah.
Okay, there is?
Yeah.
Okay.
It just depends on how you do it.
Okay, right. Okay, so there's no, okay, officially it's really difficult to pay community for their time. They need ABNs and things, and it's complicated. It should be easier to reimburse people for their time, for sharing traditional knowledge with you, as you know, developing that relationship. Actually, I think it's Brad. He says something about 3 T's, lots of tea over time, and there was something else. Trust. That's it. Yeah. It's not something that you can just wake up 1 second and you've suddenly got a relationship. And the thing with these grants is there's timelines. But community don't follow timelines. You know, it doesn't work like that. So you've got 2 very incompatible things working together, trying to work together. You're trying to pay people, but you've got difficulties there. You've got timelines you've got to stick to, but it's different for a community. So it's, very, very tricky to answer that.
I agree with you there. Like, you know, you sort of have to plan the research and know what you're doing years before the award comes out, or, you know, the research grant comes out, because, you know, they are tight turnarounds. They are 4 to 6 weeks most times. 4 to 6 weeks will barely get you 10 minutes with the right people that you need to actually talk to, that yet alone if you don't have that relationship or partnership that's already existing.
So I think that as far as funding goes, I think one of the main priorities that should be looked at is the perspective of people outside of certain areas coming into certain areas because there's research funding there. One of the main problems I see is that the priorities, let's say the national science and research priorities then change, and then all of a sudden people think that, as an example, oyster reefs are the way to go. So then you get all of an influx of people moving into oyster reefs that have never done oyster reefs before. Now that happens in every sort of area. You have these people that start to migrate from what their fields of research are because that's where the research funding goes. What I think occurs then is that you get a lot of people who are opportunistic and mightn't be the right people to be able to do the right role, which then makes it so at the moment the National Science and Research Priorities have a number 3, which is all about Indigenous knowledges. Now when we start looking at the environment, which is primarily where I'm working, you start looking at 2 other parts of the, so there's 5 parts of the National Science and Research Priorities. 3 of them relate to pretty much the environment. You start looking at healthy communities as 1, you start looking at the impact on the marine environment, that's 2, and then Indigenous knowledges, that's 3. And because of that, many people are starting to go down that route that have no idea about Indigenous protocol, and so they're trying to tick off boxes that they have no idea of what they are. And I think that there should be if we're having to determine a protocol in how to assign into research grants, I think the grant bodies need to be able to look at who they're actually giving the funding to and not just say that this person's the best person because they might be the most senior, but allowing people doing their due diligence in making sure that they're giving the research to the right people, because I know of quite a few people who aim in doing Indigenous research who have no idea about Indigenous protocols or have worked with Indigenous people. And I also know that they've done their negative on the way that they have worked with Indigenous people by saying that they can do all the work pretty much and then they don't get accreditation or acknowledgement or respect for the work that the Indigenous people have done. I think on the other side of that is that we need to have a basis of respect, and I think having that trust, understanding that there should be research priorities in forming relationships. I think we've gone away from the days where we sit and we have one person knowing everything. We're sitting in a space where it should be much more multidisciplinary, and when we're looking at an environment like the university, we should be looking at how when we're working with communities, there's going to be people in that community that understand so much more about certain aspects than what other people do. And being able to understand that, we spend months and months building teams to do ARC grants, and yet we don't spend months and months, I do, but others don't, in going out and spending time with community. And I think that if you're trying to make a project and trying to build a team, you should be doing it the same way for everyone, not just the people you see as colleagues, but the people that you're working with should be colleagues as well.
Thank you. Those tight turnaround times of Western institution grants have, and that not marrying up with our timelines is a pretty tricky thing. I know for me personally, 4 to 6 weeks, I probably haven't even seen your email yet because I haven't gone through my admin. On the back of that, we've got maybe like 5 minutes of power. So let's do like a speed round to see how many great questions we can answer with this last minute of the 5 minutes of these wonderful people's time that they have with us. So first speed question, how do you apply Indigenous data sovereignty in your work as an academic, and do you have any advice for early career researchers? Go.
Make sure that community is referenced on all journals, make sure that it goes back out to community to understand whether that's what they were trying to say. I'll let people go.
Yes, absolutely. Double check, verify everything is okay by the proper authority, the cultural authority. There'll be elders in place and they're the ones who can give the okay. Other people can't. Yeah, I'll just pass on to Shannon.
Yeah, co-authorship, decision-making, control, follow those principles.
And adding on just time and respect.
Deadly, well done. You guys are fast. Question 2. Sometimes there are conflicts between land rights and nature conservation. How do we deal with these conflicts? Or you can say pass if you're like, whoa, I was not ready for that.
I don't know how short a question that is. I think we need to understand that land shouldn't be owned. It should be cared for. And so if we're looking at conservation, we should be thinking about it in terms that is for everyone, not just for yourself.
I will pass on this one.
Yeah, I mean, Mitch stole the words right out of my mouth. I could have gone into song then, that would have been nice.
He took the words right out of my mouth.
Ooh, it must have been why you were.
That's all right, we'll have a laugh. Yeah, I mean, conservation, Indigenous-led. Professor Michael Shawn Fletcher showed a graph the other day of the impacts of, when country is cared for and the fire regimes that happen and percentage burnt. I obviously don't have the graph here to say it, but when it is under Indigenous control and Indigenous conservation, there is a lot more respect on country and there is a lot better outcomes for country.
Deadly, thank you. Question 3. Sharon loved your point about Indigenous knowledge being ongoing, whereas Western projects having endpoints. How do we ensure that knowledge from funded Western and Indigenous science projects continue to be built and build capacity without requiring ongoing funding?
All right, well, I've been thinking about this for a while. So one of the things I've been trying to work with is bringing in restoration to be able to make sure that Indigenous communities can actually do tourism around it, so they can produce their own funding and teach people so that everyone can learn about Indigenous knowledges, but be able to then make sure that the wider community are also incorporating that into their daily lives, whilst the Indigenous community is able to profit from that in a way that can continue these processes.
Deadly, did anyone else want to add or go to question 4?
Number 4, please.
If you had the platform to change the national research agenda, what would you prioritise and why?
Maybe I can go. I think we should, this is a very bold statement, I think we should focus on what's happening on Earth and try not to colonise Mars when we might not have a planet in, 100 years. What's going to be here in 200 years? What are we leaving behind? We've got all these forever chemicals. Yeah, can we please fix Earth first?
I dare say, though, all those people who want to go to Mars, let them go. Don't come back.
I mean, for me, prioritising getting country recognised as a living entity, that would be a major outcome. And, country has sustained us for generations and generations to come. And if we are failing to sustain country and ourselves, then we are failing ourselves in general.
Yeah, and I think on that, understanding that culture is living traditional knowledge, and that people need to understand that, yes, we have stories, yes, we have songs, yes, we have dance, but all of that is knowledge. Universities are starting to come to terms with the fact that that Western science isn't the only way to do things, and I think that the faster we're able to prove that, the faster we're able to have more agency within our own communities.
I think that comes down to the economic empowerment, allowing communities to take control of their own economy, creating self-sufficient communities. Yeah.
Deadly, thank you. What gives you the shits question? So if you could change it, what policy or system change would most empower your research to have greater impact on country and with community?
One of the biggest things that is really grinds my gears, if I could say, is restoration. So as I'm sure many people here are aware, that Indigenous fishing practices is a cultivation and harvesting practice. It's not just harvesting. And so under the Indigenous fishing licences, I think we should have cultivation as part of that, and being able to do that in a way that then isn't governed by the New South Wales government, but governed by our own communities. Yeah.
So my 2 cents, you notice during the World Wars that's when periods of intense innovation happen. That's when all the discoveries happen. It's because they've removed the red tape. Why do we have to wait for a world war to remove the red tape and get stuff done? We need stuff done yesterday. So let's remove the red tape and let's fix it.
Yeah, mine's incompetence. Incompetence really annoys me. But, you know, seeing people in positions of power that can make this change, that, you know, there's examples of countries suffering all around. You can look anywhere. It's not a great place at the moment. There are parts of greatness, and, you know, this continent is beautiful, but you can see countries struggling through floods, through fires, through droughts. And if you're in a position of power to make the changes that we need to make, and you're just sitting back watching it, scratching your head saying, I don't know what to do. Like, it's just incompetent, and it's frustrating.
I guess the other thing in politics is when there is an issue with, like, for example, Indigenous housing, they don't go to the housing minister. They go to the Indigenous minister. Why can't all places of parliament be places where Indigenous affairs are heard, right? Why do we have to go directly to the housing minister? Why can't we go to there? Why do we have to go through the Indigenous ministers?
That starts to become an issue of the yes voice.
Yeah.
That becomes very political.
And that's very political.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being involved in our speed round. We have one question that's left for online, but we might see if we can get a response via email back to you. I'm sorry that we didn't get to answer everything. I had a lot of fun today, and I really appreciate the time of Shannon, Katrina and Mitch. Thank you so much for being here. Your research is so important. I think a really fantastic example of three people who have really pushed boundaries, made and forged new and incredible paths, who are leaders in their space, who are strengthened by the knowledge and wisdom of deep ancient lands and history. And I'm really proud to know you all and to be able to sit here and share your voices. So like Shannon said earlier, share the stories of these great people and make sure that you let other people know about the work that they're doing. There's kind of this poor rhetoric here in Australia that there aren't many Indigenous scientists. There are so many, it's actually ridiculous. Exemplify our work, look at the media that you're consuming, whether it's written or print or movies, and diversify the people that you're listening to. There are so many incredible First Nations leaders around who need a seat at the table and have their voice heard. So we don't always have to consume media that's from white old men or Americans. To wrap up the conversation, I really want to thank you for coming out tonight and for your time. We know that your time is really valuable and that you're important people too. We're all important people here, so thank you for coming. A huge thank you to our wonderful speakers. A massive thank you to the Academy of Science and the incredible organisers for making this such a treat and for bringing us across. And my last remark is about this metaphor that I was told from one of my sissies who lives up on Yolngu country at the moment, and she was talking about this metaphor of an oyster. And an oyster is formed when a tiny little grain of sand starts to rub at the surface of a shell, and it rubs against the surface of a shell. Don't correct me, I don't care. It's a pearl, sorry, not an oyster. I'm glad you corrected me. Shame job. I'm talking about a pearl. The metaphor's about a pearl, to be clear. Oh my God. I'm so sorry. So when a shell sits at the bottom of the ocean, I've done so well though, you know, it's been a couple of hours. A piece of sand scratches at the surface of the shell and it forms a calcium carbonate surface, and that turns into a pearl, definitely not an oyster. And as this grain of sand or grains of sand start to aggravate the surface more and more, the pearl grows and shines and becomes more and more beautiful and bold and bright. So in life, we can be both the pearl that grow hardened and more beautiful with the shit things that come at us, with the short timelines that we have on grants and the ridiculously long applications, or the feedback from your supervisor that you think, did you seriously not read that whole page? And all of those political things in between, like we alluded to at the end. And we can also be the piece of sand, right? We're the ones that are agitating against big systems to make massive changes, who are pushing against things, and it might take us our whole lives or maybe 4 generations of sand rubbing up against the shell to get something done, but it's important work. And what would you rather do than have a positive impact on trying to change the world and make more pearls and grow more beautiful with hard things? So thank you for your time. Be a pearl, be a shell, and if you want to be an oyster, that's also cool. I'm sorry for ruining the metaphor. Have a beautiful night.